June 19th, 1944. 18,000 feet above the Philippine Sea. The cockpit of the Mitsubishi A6M50 smells of burnt castor oil and fear. Lieutenant Kenji Sato grips the stick, his knuckles white inside goatskin gloves. The air is thin, freezing against the uninsulated aluminum skin of the fuselage. Below him, the Pacific is a blinding sheet of azure, indifferent to the slaughter. Formation. Break! His radio crackles, static cutting through the roar of the 14-cylinder Sakai engine. Kenji banks hard left, pulling G's that drain the color from his vision. There are no clouds to hide in, nothing but blue void. He scans the horizon. Clear. No black dots, no glint of sun on canopy glass. Yet, the tracers tear past his starboard wing a split second later. How? Two Grumman F-6F Hellcats dive from the sun, screaming like banshees. They knew exactly where Kenji's squadron was. They were waiting. It is not combat. It is an execution. They are spirits, his wingman screams before his plane disintegrates into a fireball of orange and black smoke. Kenji fires his Type 99 cannons at empty air, a futile gesture against an omniscient enemy. He realizes with a sickening drop in his stomach that the Americans aren't just better pilots. They possess a magic he cannot comprehend. They see without eyes. A .50 caliber round shatters his canopy. Glass sprays. The world spins into a vortex of blue and blood. 14 months earlier, Point Mugu Naval Air Station, California. The heat in California was different from the humidity of the Pacific. It was dry, abrasive, a physical weight that pressed the dust into the pores of Kenji Sato's skin. He gripped the handle of the rake, feeling the rough wood bite into his calluses. Right hand, left hand, pull, release. The rhythm was a meditation, a desperate attempt to impose order on a world that had lost its axis. He was no longer Lieutenant Sato of the 201st Kokutai. He was prisoner number 482, a ghost haunting the manicured edges of Point Mugu Naval Air Station. "Keep it moving, fellas," the guard drawled, shifting his M1 carbine from one shoulder to the other. He was a boy, barely 20, chewing gum with a bovine complacency that made Kenji's stomach churn. Kenji lowered his head, focusing on the gravel path, but he could hear it. Whirr, click, whirr, click. The sound came from behind the chain-link fence, 50 yards away. A massive skeletal structure of steel mesh rotated atop a low concrete blockhouse. It spun with a relentless, hypnotic precision, sweeping the horizon every few seconds. The radar. To the other prisoners, infantrymen and conscripts, it was just American machinery. Loud, ugly, industrial. But Kenji felt a phantom pain in his left leg, where the shrapnel had embedded itself 14 months ago. He knew what that machine did. It was the reason his Zero had turned into a coffin before he even saw the enemy. It was the Oracle that whispered to the American Hellcats, telling them exactly where to strike. "Water break," the guard shouted. Kenji dropped the rake and walked to the canvas lister bag hanging from a tripod. As he drank the lukewarm, chlorinated water, he looked up over the rim of the tin cup. The antenna tower loomed against the stark blue sky. It looked like a bed spring set on its side, absurd and fragile. This, he thought, the bitterness rising like bile. This assembly of wires and rusted bolts is what broke the empire. He expected a fortress. He expected guards in heavy armor. Instead, he saw a wooden door to the blockhouse propped open with a brick to let in the breeze. A sign read, "Restricted Area, Authorized Personnel Only." From the darkness of the open door, a strange, pale light spilled out, barely visible in the afternoon sun. And with it, the hum. A low-frequency vibration that seemed to resonate in Kenji's teeth. It sounded like a hive of electric hornets. He had to get closer. He had to know if there was a spirit inside the machine, or if the Americans had simply sold their souls to a demon of mathematics. "Hey, 482!" The guard's voice snapped like a whip. "You missed a spot by the fence. Get over there." Kenji bowed, a reflex he couldn't kill, and picked up his rake. He walked toward the fence, toward the hum, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was walking toward the thing that had killed his wingman, armed only with a garden tool. The guard turned his back to light a cigarette, cupping his hands against the Pacific breeze. It was a window of 5 seconds, perhaps 10. Kenji shuffled closer to the chain-link fence, dragging the rake across the gravel to mask his footsteps. The sign on the wire mesh, "Danger, High Voltage," was illustrated with a jagged red lightning bolt. It felt less like a warning of electricity and more like a talisman marking sacred ground. He was now only 30 feet from the blockhouse. The hum was louder here, a physical pressure against his eardrums. The rotating antenna overhead cast a rhythmic, strobing shadow across the dry grass. Dark, light, dark, light. Inside the open doorway, the shadows were deep. Kenji squinted, his breath held tight in his chest. At first he saw only the silhouette of large metal cabinets, hulking shapes like shrines in a temple. But then, movement caught his eye. A light. It wasn't the warm yellow of a lantern or the harsh white of an electric bulb. It was a sick, spectral green, a perfect circle of luminescence glowing in the semi-darkness. Kenji froze, his grip on the rake turning his knuckles into white stones. He watched as a bright radial line swept around the circle, like the second hand of a clock, but faster. Everywhere the line touched, it left a decaying trail of emerald fire. It was alive. It pulsed. A demon's eye, Kenji thought, a cold shiver racing down his spine despite the California heat. They have captured a spirit and forced it to watch the sky. This was the secret. This was how they found him in the clouds. It wasn't superior skill. It was sorcery. The Americans had bottled lightning and taught it to hunt. The realization was both terrifying and strangely comforting. It meant his defeat had been inevitable. No mortal man could fight a machine that saw in the dark. "Hey, you!" The guard's voice cracked like a pistol shot. Kenji flinched, snapping his head back to the ground, furiously raking the same patch of dirt. "Step away from the fence, Tojo," the guard growled, walking over with his hand resting on the bolt of his carbine. "Unless you want to get fried." Kenji bowed low, mumbling an apology in broken English, backing away with erratic, fearful steps. He retreated to the safety of the garden beds, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. But as he bent to pull a weed, he couldn't help himself. He glanced back. The green eye was still there, blinking in the deep shadow of the room, watching him, and for a split second he saw a shadow move across the face of the glass, a human shape. Someone was in there with the monster. For 3 days, Kenji manicured the hibiscus hedges that lined the walkway to the blockhouse, working with a slowness that bordered on insubordination. He was hunting. He had constructed an image of the operator in his mind. The keeper of the green eye must be a man of formidable intellect, a scientist with thick glasses and the cold bearing of a surgeon, or perhaps a senior officer with iron gray hair. Someone worthy of the power they wielded. The hum of the antenna overhead was constant, a drilling vibration that seemed to heat the afternoon air. Around 1400 hours, the door to the blockhouse pushed open. Kenji froze, his shears hovering over a crimson blossom. A figure stepped out into the harsh California sunlight, blinking against the glare. Kenji's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a scientist. It wasn't an officer. It was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 22. She wore the navy blue skirt and tailored jacket of the waves, the fabric slightly wrinkled from a long shift. Her hair, a soft brown, was rolled neatly off her collar in compliance with regulations, but a few stray wisps stuck to her forehead with sweat. She didn't look like a conqueror. She looked exhausted. She leaned against the concrete wall, removed her white-topped hat, and fanned herself with it. Under her arm, she clutched a clipboard and a pack of Chesterfield cigarettes. Kenji stared, forgetting to bow, forgetting the guard, forgetting to breathe. This was the enemy? This slight creature with narrow shoulders was the one guiding the Hellcats. A deep, confusing shame washed over him, hotter than the anger he had felt in the cockpit. If he had been shot down by a samurai, he could accept it as fate. If he had been defeated by a demon, he could accept it as bad luck. But to be plucked from the sky by a girl who looked like she should be grading school papers. It was an insult to his ancestors. It rendered his sacrifice absurd. The girl, Margaret, he would later learn, though now she was just the sorceress, struck a match. She inhaled the smoke deeply, her eyes closing for a moment of pure, unguarded relief. Then she opened them and looked aimlessly across the garden. Her gaze swept over Kenji. She didn't see a pilot. She didn't see a threat. She saw a gardener in faded denim dungarees. Her eyes slid past him as if he were part of the shrubbery. It was the ultimate dismissal. She controlled the lightning that had destroyed his squadron, yet she didn't even deem him worth a second glance. The following Tuesday brought a shift in the wind, carrying the smell of salt and aviation fuel from the runway. Kenji was emptying the galvanized trash cans near the rear entrance of the blockhouse. The hum of the radar was a constant headache, a mosquito that wouldn't die. The rear door creaked open. Kenji stiffened, hugging the trash can like a shield. It was the girl again, but this time, she wasn't alone. A male technician in dungarees, wiping grease from his hands with a rag, followed her out. In her hand, she didn't hold a weapon or a decoding device. She held a coffee pot. It was a standard-issue aluminum percolator, the kind found in every mess hall from Tokyo to San Diego. It was battered, with a distinct dent on the side and soot staining the bottom. It looked pitifully domestic against the backdrop of the concrete bunker and the high-tech antenna spinning above. "You're killing me, Maggie," the technician said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet afternoon. "This stuff is battery acid." "Complaint noted, sailor," she replied, her voice flat with fatigue. She poured the dark, steaming liquid into his tin cup. Her hand shook slightly, a tremor of exhaustion, not fear. A few drops splashed onto the concrete. "Whoops," she muttered, wiping the spill with the toe of her shoe. Kenji watched, transfixed by the banality of it. A drop of spilled coffee. A bad joke. A dented pot. In the Imperial Navy, the pilots drank sake with ritual solemnity before a sortie. Everything was imbued with the weight of the Emperor and death. But here? Here the people who operated the God Machine were just tired workers on a break. The sorceress wasn't chanting spells. She was running on caffeine and sarcasm. The realization hit Kenji like a physical blow to the chest, harder than the G-forces of a dogfight. They didn't beat us with magic, he thought, staring at the dent in the coffee pot. They beat us with logistics. They beat us with people who can drink bad coffee while destroying a squadron, and then go home to dinner. The mystique evaporated. The demon was gone, leaving only a girl who looked like she hadn't slept in 24 hours, holding a pot of burnt coffee as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. For the first time since his capture, Kenji didn't feel fear. He felt a strange, hollow disappointment. The monster was just a machine, and the pilot was just a girl. 2 weeks later, the coastal fog rolled in thick and heavy, wrapping Point Mugu in a wet gray blanket. The dampness seeped into everything, the canvas of the tents, the joints of the elders, and the delicate circuitry of the blockhouse. Kenji was clearing a drainage ditch near the generator shed when the rhythm of the hum changed. It went from a steady drone to a jagged, spitting cough. Through the reinforced glass of the side window, he saw the green eye flaring violently. The clean, sweeping line of the radar beam was gone. Instead, the circular screen was drowning in chaotic spikes of light. Grass. That was what the American radio operators called it. Static. Clutter. Inside, the scene was one of controlled panic. Margaret was no longer the bored girl with the coffee pot. She was hunched over the console, one hand adjusting the gain dials with frantic precision, the other pressing a headset tight against her ear. She was shouting something into the microphone, but the glass muffled her voice into a silent scream. She looked small against the bank of flickering electronics. The magic was failing her. Suddenly, she ripped the headset off and slammed her open palm against the side of the metal cabinet. Bang! Kenji flinched instinctively. It was a universal gesture. He had done the exact same thing to a jamming 20mm cannon over Rabaul. He had seen his mechanics kick the stubborn starter of a truck in Manchuria. It was the rage of the warrior betrayed by his weapon. In that moment of frustration, the distance between them collapsed. She wasn't a sorceress casting spells. She was a technician fighting a losing battle against physics, heat, and vacuum tubes. She wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist, her face twisted in a grimace of sheer exhaustion. Kenji stopped, leaning on his shovel. He found himself holding his breath, waiting for the image to clear, wanting the machine to work. Not for the enemy, but for the girl. Turn the voltage regulator, he thought, projecting the thought through the glass. Check the cathode bias. As if hearing him, she tweaked a lower knob. The chaotic spikes on the screen settled. The sweeping arm of the radar returned, cutting through the electronic fog like a lighthouse beam. Margaret slumped in her chair, exhaling a breath that fogged the glass from the inside. She had won the skirmish. Kenji looked away before she could catch him staring, but his heart was beating a different rhythm. He no longer hated her. He understood her. The confrontation happened not with a bang, but with the squeak of a heavy steel hinge. It was late afternoon. The shadows of the eucalyptus trees were stretching long across the compound. Kenji was sweeping the concrete pad, directly in front of the blockhouse entrance, a task usually reserved for the trustiest prisoners. The guard had drifted away to light a cigarette near the perimeter fence. Squeak! The blast door opened. Kenji froze, his corn broom hovering inches above the cement. He was too close. According to regulations, he should have retreated 10 feet and turned his back. But his feet wouldn't move. Margaret stepped out. She almost walked into him. She stopped abruptly, her black Oxford scuffing against the concrete. She was so close he could smell the stale scent of tobacco smoke and the faint chemical odor of ozone that seemed to cling to her uniform. For the first time, there was no glass between them, no wire, no scope. Kenji gripped the broom handle, his muscles tensing for a blow that wouldn't come. He looked up, expecting to see the fire of victory in her eyes. He expected her to spit on him, or to recoil in disgust at the sight of the Jap enemy. Instead, she just looked at him. Her eyes were hazel, rimmed with red from hours of staring at the phosphor screen. She looked at his face, not his number, not his uniform, but his face. There was no hatred. There was no triumph. There was only a dull, weary recognition. It was the look one gave to a stray dog that one was too tired to kick. "Excuse me," she murmured, her voice raspy. She sidestepped him, careful not to brush against his dirty dungarees, and walked past. Kenji stood paralyzed as she walked away toward the barracks. The wind caught a loose strand of her hair. The interaction had lasted 3 seconds, yet it shattered him. If she had hated him, he would have remained a warrior in his own mind. But her indifference, her polite "excuse me," it stripped him of his status. To her, he wasn't a dangerous pilot or a monster of the Pacific. He was just an obstacle in the doorway. He was nothing. And in that nothingness, the war finally ended for Kenji Sato. Not with a treaty, but with a polite nod from a tired girl who just wanted to go to sleep. Sunday at Point Mugu felt different. The roar of the engines on the airstrip was muted. The shouting of the drill sergeants was absent. There was only the sound of the ocean and the distant, tinny pealing of a bell. Kenji sat on the edge of his cot in the barracks, listening. Even the guards seemed lethargic, their aggressive vigilance replaced by a drowsy indifference. But the hum of the radar blockhouse did not stop. The war did not observe the Sabbath. From the window of the prisoner barracks, Kenji had a clear line of sight to the chapel, a whitewashed wooden structure with a modest steeple. He watched the Americans drifting towards it in small groups. Then, the door to the blockhouse opened. Margaret stepped out. She had changed. She was no longer wearing the working dungarees or the stained jacket. She wore her dress blues, the fabric crisp and dark. Her shoes were polished to a mere shine. On her head sat the distinctive hat with the white brim, positioned perfectly. But it was what she carried that arrested Kenji's attention. Not a clipboard, not a coffee pot. Clutched against her chest was a small black book with gold lettering, a missile. She did not look back at the machine that was still spinning, still hunting, still guiding death across the Pacific. She walked with a steady, humble gait towards the chapel. She joined the stream of sailors and officers, her head bowed slightly. Kenji felt a vertigo of the soul. How, he wondered, how can she guide the fire that burns my people, and then walk into that house to speak to her God? It was a contradiction that should have fueled his hate. Instead, it broke it. He realized that for her, the radar screen was not a demon's eye. It was just a duty, a terrible, necessary chore, like washing grave clothes. The sorceress was seeking forgiveness, or perhaps just peace, for the things her duty required her to do. Inside the chapel, the hymn began. The sound drifted across the wire fences, faint but undeniable. Eternal Father, strong to save, whose arm hath bound the restless wave. Kenji closed his eyes. He thought of the shrines in Kyoto, of the incense smoke, of his own mother praying for his safe return, a return that would never happen. The Americans were not gods. They were not demons. They were just people, terrified of the storm, praying to the same silence. The tension that had held Kenji's spine rigid for 14 months finally snapped. He slumped against the wall, the breath leaving him in a long, shuddering sigh. The war was over. Not on the map, but inside him. The service had ended. The sailors and waves had dispersed back to their barracks or duty stations. The compound was quiet, save for the eternal, rhythmic grinding of the radar motor. Kenji was sweeping the path near the chapel entrance when he saw it, a small patch of white against the dusty California earth. He looked around. The guard was dozing in the shade of a eucalyptus tree. Kenji knelt and picked it up. It was a handkerchief. It was made of delicate cotton, edged with simple lace. In the corner, embroidered in blue thread, were the initials AML. It didn't smell of hydraulic fluid, or burnt castor oil, or the copper tang of blood, the smells that had defined Kenji's life for 2 years. It smelled faintly of lavender soap. He held the fragile square of fabric in his rough, calloused hand. It was absurdly soft. This was what had defeated him. Not the steel of the Hellcats, nor the cathode rays of the Green Eye. It was this. A civilization that could send its children to war with iron machines, yet still ensure they had lace handkerchiefs to wipe their brows. a society that could seamlessly blend the monstrous with the mundane. His mind drifted back to that day over the Philippine Sea. The blue void, the magic. They see without eyes, he had thought then, terrified. He looked up at the blockhouse one last time. The antenna rotated. Whir, click. It wasn't magic. It was just a machine, watched by a girl named Margaret, who liked coffee and prayed on Sundays. The demon eye was just a tool, no more supernatural than his own rake. Kenji folded the handkerchief carefully. He didn't keep it. That would be theft, a violation of his own code. Instead, he placed it gently on the low stone wall where she might find it on her return. He picked up his broom. The sky above was a brilliant, blinding azure, but for the first time in 14 months, it didn't look like a graveyard. It was just the sky. Kenji Sato took a breath of the dry air, turned his back on the machine, and went back to work.